Hello, my name is Nastaran and I'm teaching mostly industrial relation at University of Richmond. As you can see from the title of my presentation, which is based on my basically study, which I started in 2013, I have a particular interest in basically industrial clusters or agglomeration or industrial district. So let me give you a quick introduction about what agglomerations exactly are and what we mean by industrial district, which Alfred Marshall, for the first time, he introduced and he came up with the idea of industrial district after observation of textile firm in Lancashire in United Kingdom. And he was the one in 1890s, he came up with the idea of if firms are located in a vicinity and a close proximity with each other, they tend to do better. So therefore, what he said was, and what he observed was, firms tend to do better when they can save money on the transactional costs and delivery, and they have a better access to the pool of labor, a specialized pool of labor, and a specialized supplier. They tend to be closer to the market, and they have a better access to the knowledge, which he called it knowledge spillover. Later on, Michael Porter, he came up with the idea of cluster, and he named that industrial clusters. And he said, if you're located in a close vicinity with other firms, you're more likely to have a better access to knowledge, and you are interconnected, and you gain a better competitive advantage. Why clusters are important? They are important because of various reasons. Obviously, all of the advantages that we mentioned about the industrial clusters, the classic advantages that was introduced by Alfred Marshall and Michael Porter, but obviously they contribute especially to the regional economy, and that's why for this reason it's very, very important to understand and to study them, how they actually function. There are two ways of looking at the cluster. The first way, the most popular way, is when we are interested in clusters that they are successful. I'm sure that all of you have heard about Silicon Valley. I mean, there have been ample study of the industrial cluster in California, Silicon Valley, which is a hub of telecommunication and has the highest concentration of basically very successful telecommunication and high-tech companies. Or Silicon Valley, for example, in Israel. Not only policymakers are interested in the study of successful clusters, also they are very interested in understanding how and why some of the clusters, they don't do well. So we have so many clusters like Silicon Glen in Scotland, which it wanted to actually replicate what happened and the in California and how Silicon Valley actually functioned, but they are not successful. And there are many researchers that they want to find out why they are not successful. Both of these type of studies, they give us a kind of insight in what is happening within the cluster. And it's important for the regional economy, for flourishing a particular region, to understand this function very well. My focus of paper is in a particular cluster, which is a textile and clothing cluster in the East Midlands. And unlike many, many studies, there is that they study successful clusters, and most of them, they are high-tech clusters in developed countries, or many studies that they look at low-tech clusters, but in developing countries, like Pakistan, like India, like Bangladesh, like Malaysia, Iskandar, Malaysia, for example, Rana Plaza in Bangladesh. One thing that is missing between these studies and the gap was a study of a mature clusters, which is declining but is still functioning in a developed country like United Kingdom. So many of these studies, so many of these clusters, like the Magic Circle in Italy, for example, has been studied many times. We have clusters, textile clusters, that they have been studied in Germany, in Italy, and in Spain. But in England, unfortunately, we don't have much of these studies, basically. What I want to know is very close, basically a study of this particular cluster in United Kingdom, which is functioning. It's not like the textile cluster in a Scottish border in United Kingdom, which doesn't function. It's not like Lancashire, which it doesn't function again. It does functioning, but it's declining. Why I am saying it's declining? Because the level of employment has been declined in the last 60 years. And this cluster is very, very mature. So therefore, what I've done is I collected primary data, started from 2013. My phase one of my research was about the knowledge spillover, focused specifically in the knowledge spillover in this particular cluster. Then my previous phase of research was about, instead of looking at the cluster policy on a cluster level, I'm not actually just looking at the cluster level, I'm looking at all of the firms to see how they are interacting with each other and how they cope with the current situation in textile manufacturing in United Kingdom and how actually they survive. So this is a study of resilience of firm in textile cluster in Nottingham and Leicester, which is very close to Nottingham in the East Midlands. So therefore, I interviewed 30 firms, mostly small and medium sized firms. 6 of them, they had over 500 employees. And I interviewed 6 firms that they had to fold up, basically, because they couldn't function. So I've been introduced through the snowballing from a functioning firm to the owner of these firms. So I had the opportunity to talk to them to see what went wrong. And I was in the collaboration with the textile cluster agency in Nottingham, and they helped me quite a lot with gathering the information, and I funded some part of this project. My next project will be specifically to look at the trust and the culture, actually, which I'm going to go and talk about this later on. Why I'm talking about textile in England when we have all of these finance and education and all of those very flourishing sectors? One reason is, in England, still we have, as you can see the number here obviously, still we have around 100,000 people who they are employed in the textile sector, and a value of the textile that the output of textile was around £9 billion in 2012. Between 2012 to 2015, the number of employees increased by 5,000 people. And then Nottingham also has the highest concentration of textile firms. So therefore, and it employs quite a lot of people, it's very important for the regional economy. And if the textile manufacturing dies in Nottingham and Leicester, we have a big problem in the East Midlands, obviously. Methodology, obviously, I decided not to just look at numbers, because numbers are great, but they don't all the time answer the why questions and how questions. I wanted to have a greater insight in the fact that what is happening, that it cluster that also is declining, but at the same time still surviving and contributing positively to the regional and national economy. So therefore, and I decided to do this obviously qualitatively, and I decided to do in a case study way. So it has been a single case study for me, because I always believe that case studies give you a very good insight in what is happening, and you get a very good answer in what is happening there. So therefore, my research questions that you can see, which obviously I can't quite cover the second one in 10 minutes, but basically the first concern of my research was about how firms are surviving, what are the strategies, what are the flexibilities, and is this according to the Marshallian cluster idea, which is basically saying that no, as far as you are within the cluster, you are fine, or is it neo-Marshallian idea, which is like Michael Porter says, that you need a level of trust and understanding and horizontal integration, or is it just the vertical integration? And I wanted to find out that through that, will I get to any point and find the answer to the question or not? So there are a few things that I try to consider in my interviews, because I did in-depth interviews based on it was a semi-structured, obviously based on a questionnaire, which it had 10 sections. Internationalization, obviously, is very important. Globalization is something that we can't, it is there, and it's important, and it put extra pressure in basically competition on the firms, basically, in any sector. Modernization and capital intensification. I've been in many factories, and in the factories, I could see the output and the value of the production did not drop in the last 10 years, but the number of employment has been very, decreased. And I've been to the factory and I just observed and saw that machines are working instead of human being, and you only can see 5 employees, but there's still machines are working. Specialization is very important. This is what is happening, upgrading value chain activity, specialization. Firms in Nottingham, they used to do various activities like dyeing, for example, like knitting, like cutting, like every other things. And what they are doing right now is they outsource many things. They have their own subcontractors, or they do offshoring, depends on their own size. And they select a particular, basically, activity, and they go through a specialization. And that has been, obviously, later on through the interview, that has been the key for the success of this firm. Industry life cycle is not the case, because this is not an industry that is dead. The expenditure of British consumer for textile and clothing has been increased in the last 25 years. So it's not the case that, people don't want any clothes or anything like that, or they spend less. Policies, they are something that I was looking at it, and later on we will see that, unfortunately, there are not very cluster policies are involved in this particular cluster. And what happened is, I, again, did the coding for the qualitative data analysis, and you can see a list of, basically, labels. They emerged from this case studies. Subcontracting, firms tend to do lots of subcontracting without sharing any knowledge and information, which is very sad. They don't solve any problem together. They are afraid of talking to each other because they think that they're going to give away the list of basically buyers or even their suppliers. Unfortunately, they don't buy from the cluster, they don't sell to the cluster, so it feels like being in the cluster means nothing from the point of sourcing the material and give it to other firms, obviously, to use it. And location, many bigger firms, they have been to other countries. They offshored, obviously, because that made very sense. But other smaller firms, they didn't have the opportunity. Many of them, they ran out of business because they couldn't do what bigger firms they were doing. Knowledge sharing doesn't happen at all. Collaboration, unfortunately, doesn't happen at all there. And government support, most of the firms, they said that they never received any government support at all. Joint product and marketing doesn't exist between the small, medium-sized firms. Bigger firms tend to do a little bit of joint collaboration and production, but it's, again, everything is very secret and they are very careful. Specialization is very, very important for this firm because they did get rid of many activities that they weren't profitable for them, or they could source them somewhere else cheaper. Capital intensification, some firms, they had the money, they went through that very successfully, but that means that we have less employment. And then we have the globalization impact. We had the employment skills, because it's a big problem that we don't have. When people get retired in Nottingham and Leicester, unfortunately, lack of a skill is a problem there. We can't substitute them with anyone else, and that's a big problem in United Kingdom. And we don't have the same problem in Italy. We don't have the same problem in Spain or in Germany. Quality control, not much. Customers are very interested, you can see, customers are very interested in buying cheaply, and they're not really, and there is a problem here. For example, lace production in Nottingham, in United Kingdom, they were producing the best lace in the world, in fact. And nowadays, with the fraction of the time in China, you produce meters and meters of the same, not the same, looking the same sort of lace with the less durability and less quality, but people, it feels like it doesn't matter anymore. Vicinity doesn't matter. The cost of transportation nowadays are decreasing, so people don't mind if they are in Nottingham or somewhere else. And all of my interviewees, they said that it really doesn't matter if they are there because they have been always there through their parents or through the previous generation, but actually it didn't actually matter at all. Low-cost competition, again, people want cheap, the word of frustration. People really want to buy cheaply, and that's why you go to prices. Most of the time they mention the fact that people prefer to buy 10 items from Primark, which is produced in Rana Plaza in Bangladesh, but not one item, nice item, which is produced in Nottingham, obviously. Many of the smaller firms, they believe that textile will be back to United Kingdom again. And they said the cost of production in China is increasing because of the new legislation they have. The cost of production in Romania and Turkey is increasing. And there have been signs of basically companies are coming back. Example would be Speedo, for example, brought back many of its manufacturing from the overseas country back to United Kingdom. Paul Smith, which is a very sort of considered a luxury brand in United Kingdom, they are back and they spend a lot of money on the factory that they have in Nottingham, and obviously they generated a lot of employment and they're feeding all of these very small firms basically. And succession is something that it's very questionable in Nottingham and Leicester, because many times that I ask my interviewees that what are you going to do in the future? Are you going to pass your business to your children as your parent, they passed it to you? And they said, no, I'm going to get retired and I'm going to sell my factory or, for example, workshop, and I don't really care what's going to happen. This is very sad again, because this basically has been around for decades and decades in United Kingdom. So it's going to be very, very sad. We have a hate and love relationship between firms and globalization. The smaller firms, they hate globalization and they say they can't cope with the pressure of competition and globalization. On the other hand, we have basically the bigger firms that they source their material and the supply of materials very cheaply from other countries, and they're very happy with that. And they said they couldn't actually grow their business if it wasn't because of the globalization. Obviously, they have a bigger and new market, which in the past they didn't have it. The conclusion would be, instead of having the horizontal integration in United Kingdom, it feels like we have only vertical integration between the firms. Firms are unable to share knowledge. And that's why in my future study, there is another paper that I'm working on it at the moment, I'm going to look to see, because the whole idea of doing the research is me in collaboration with the textile agencies in the East Midlands, is to find out how we can improve the situation. And one of the ways that we can improve the situation is through knowledge spillover. When firms, they contribute, they try to find problems. This is what is happening in Germany. Many times I went for an interview and people didn't let me to actually see the manufacturing process. And I've been in a separate office. They were very careful, even me, which I'm not even in the business of textile production anymore, even me, not to go and see the production. And they are so terrified, unfortunately, in the British culture, not to share any information with other people. Which, as in Germany, that's not the case. In Italy, this is not the case. And that's why we have all of those fantastic case studies by Michael Dunford, that they are actually saying that why the Italian firms are so successful. One of the reasons is obviously the knowledge spillover and knowledge sharing. So I am going to look at this study. All of this stuff that I said, well, obviously the marketing doesn't happen that much because a smaller firm, they don't have the money for that. And it's only the bigger firms, they have the money. And the trust is something in United Kingdom that has root, I believe it has a root in the culture of the country, and this is something that we need to address. And it can be through the education, it can be through various meetings, it can be through different agencies. So this is something that we can do. And obviously the recommendation would be, we have to come up with the cluster policy. By studying firms, we need to come up with the cluster policy that promote the cluster in United Kingdom, and not only the East Midlands cluster, also the Scottish border cluster, also the Lancashire cluster. I mean, in Scottish border, we have the best production of wool and silk in United Kingdom that is still feeding many countries in Europe. So that would be a shame if we don't address the issues and if we don't actually move toward a future development. Thank you very much.